Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr President. Looks like you need something to wake you up there, so I thought I'd rise to my feet to help you. No offence there, Senator Xenophon, but I wanted to speak tonight about something that's quite personal for me, something that was very important to my wife and I over our still only very short in the scheme of things time together. We've been married for just over 10 years, and the hardest thing we've had to do in that time is to buy our first home and save up for our first home. It's actually something close to Senator Xenophon's heart, this issue, I know as well. And it's been hard because, as most people would know in this chamber, since the early 2000s there's been a great run-up in house prices, and home ownership is becoming increasingly unaffordable for young families in Australia. And I'm perhaps one of the few, and I don't mean to make it too personal, but I'm perhaps one of the few in this chamber and this parliament that have had to buy their first home since those prices ran up, and we were starting a young family during this time, and it was very difficult to save up the money for a significant deposit while you're having kids, while you're having your wife necessarily out of the workforce, and you're still trying to pay rent in a very costly market. And at the time, while we were trying to save for our first home and save for that deposit, I had, and my wife had, tens of thousands of dollars in superannuation of our money that we had worked for, that had been paid to us, but because of the regulation we have on superannuation, we weren't allowed to use. And I thought that was an inequity, that we could not use our money to buy something as important as our first home, where we'd raise our children and hopefully build ourselves a nest egg ultimately for our retirement. Obviously, this is an idea that's been kicking around for some time, and at the start of the debate, I just started my contribution. I'd just like to point out that one of the first people to actually support and propose this idea was Mr Paul Keating in 1993. And at the 1993 election, Mr Keating launched the Labor Party's election platform at the Bankstown Hall, and in that platform policy, he promised to let all Australians draw down from their superannuation of up to $10,000 to purchase their own home. And in launching that policy, the Labor Party said, and I quote, "For most people, a debt-free home is as important a part of retirement security as superannuation income." And they were right. They were right 20 years ago. It's unfortunate that they've moved away from that position, and I'd like to return to that position by going through some of the arguments that have been raised against this idea in the last couple of weeks as it's been aired. And in particular, I want to start with an argument that Mr Keating has made now against this idea, despite supporting it 20 years ago. Mr Keating said that we shouldn't do this because if we allowed people to purchase their own home, they'd lose the compounding interest of investment. And yes, it's very important that you save and put your money into assets so they grow, and over time you'll be wealthier. But what that forgets is putting your money into superannuation is not the only form of asset. Putting your money into equities is not necessarily the only or best performing asset, and putting your money into bricks and mortar also lets you gain from the benefits of compounding, has been experienced in the last 20 years in Australian property markets. Indeed, over that period of time, the ASX 2014 long-term investing report shows that property has earned a return of 9.9% a year, and these are in nominal terms, and equities have returned 8.7% a year. So putting your money in your own home is a good investment. It's not just good for yourself and your family and your financial security, it is a good investment. And the second argument that has been made against this idea is that it may undermine the retirement income system. And that's connected to the first point, the first argument against it, the loss of compounding. But there's a broader issue here that people won't catch up on their savings if they take money out in their young ages. The first point I'd like to make about that is that the superannuation system right now does not actually do a very good job of keeping people off the pension. After 20 years, more than 20 years of having superannuation, still 70% of retirees claim the pension. And if in the intergenerational report, Treasury project that over the next 40 years, and we'll start to have people that have had their whole working lives contributing to superannuation in that period, over the next 40 years, that figure will drop from 70% to 67%. So in 2054-55, according to Treasury, after we've had a superannuation system for what will it be then, 11 plus 54, 65 years, after we've had that system in place for 65 years, we will still have a situation where 67% of retirees claim the pension. And the principal reason for that is that superannuation doesn't guarantee you income when you're 80 or 90, it only guarantees you income when you retire. Say 55 or 60, you have income then, but then you can do whatever you like with it. You can buy homes, you can go overseas, you can buy fast cars, whatever you like, and it doesn't guarantee that people have an income through their entire retirement. The second point to make about that argument is that it depends how any such idea was put in place. Such a scheme has existed in Canada for 22 years now, where young people can borrow from their future selves, from their superannuation, buy a home, and then they are required to pay it back after they're 35 years of age. So they can borrow $25,000 a year to put into a home when they're young, and when they're 35 or over, they have to increase their superannuation contributions to pay that back. That seems a very sensible system, and more sensible to borrow from yourself than to borrow from a bank, or borrow having to pay lender's mortgage insurance, which just goes to other banks overseas and doesn't help young people here. The final argument I want to cover tonight that is made against this often is that it will push up house prices. If we provide more money to first home buyers, it will push up house prices. Well, it's a strange argument to make that by helping out people we're going to make it harder for them, because the only way that actually works is if you think that the supply of housing is completely unresponsive to price, or even more unusual, that it actually reduces the supply of housing by increasing demand. And that's clearly not the case. Yes, in certain pockets of our property markets, supply is rather inelastic and rather unresponsive to price, but in many of the areas that first home buyers typically buy their homes, there's not a limited amount of supply of land. I bought my first home on the fringes of this town here in Canberra. There's plenty of land on the fringes of Canberra. There's not a limited supply. Supply is not unresponsive to price. So this would be a well-designed policy because it would help people who want to build homes in those areas of our cities where there's comparative supply of housing. Now, that's not to say there are not issues at the state government level on the supply of housing, and there aren't things that need to be done there, but that's not something we can do in this chamber, and I do think we should help young people, and this is a good way of doing that. It's a good way because it works overseas. As I said before, the Canadian government's had it in place for 22 years, and one eighth of first home buyers now use this scheme in Canada to buy their home. It's not a majority. It's not abused. Many people still can afford to save up for their own deposit, but 1/8 is not an insignificant number of people, and I would believe that it's probably the people that would otherwise struggle to get their deposit that would access such a scheme. It also has some other benefits that are often not commented on. One of the big problems we have in our financial sector at the moment is people taking on too much debt against too little equity. When I bought my first home, it was 5% equity. I was a bit underwater if anything went wrong, but that's all we could afford. If we allowed people to dip into their super, they'd have more equity, there'd be more financial security, there'd be less risk in our financial sector in case the worst happened and prices fell, and that's another good thing that we should promote. It would also at the moment be a significant boon to the construction sector. Again, first home buyers often buy on the fringe, often buy new homes in house and land packages on the fringe of cities, and we need to build more houses in this country at the moment, and we need something to replace the investment we've had fall away in the mining sector. And housing is the great hope of the future, that we might get some boost in investment in new houses, and such a scheme could help promote that. But finally, I want to say that the main reason we should support this policy, and it's something I put in my first speech, is that we should strive to help everybody and every family own their own home, or start their own family, start their own business if that's what they want to do. Take control of their own lives, and owning your own little part of Australia is the first step for most Australians in doing that. To have their little piece of land that they can call their own, that they can be kings in their own castle, and we should help them achieve that as soon as possible with the money that they save up, and we shouldn't put restrictions on them telling them how to invest their money, how not to give them the financial security. We should be supporting people to have a go in our society, and if they want to save up to invest in the most important asset of their lives, that is something that we should support, that we should celebrate, and we should assist people to do by removing these chains on their superannuation accounts.